And you may have seen, there was a video which was circulated on the internet by one of the Aegis employees, showing them firing out the back of one of their jeeps as they went along Route Arish, the route to the airport from Baghdad, just firing indiscriminately out of the back of one of their jeeps into cars, which would then skid to the side of the road and people would run out of them. But this culture of complete impunity, whereby they just fire on whatever they like. And the most recent one you may have seen, Panorama, recently, which has followed up one of these cases, where again a British company, Erinis, opened fire on a taxi up in the north near Kirkuk, and again shot, wounded this time, 2 of the occupants, one of whom lost an eye, the other of whom lost an ear, which is one of the cases which has been taken forward. Similarly, think about the Abu Ghraib case, perhaps the most well-known example of human rights abuse in Iraq. It wasn't just US military personnel who were involved in the torture there. It was also employees of 2 US private military companies, Khaki and Titan. Titan has now been renamed as now L3, and they're actually facing legal challenges for their role in that. But throughout all of the time in Iraq, throughout all of these hundreds of cases of human rights abuse by private military contractors, there has not been one single criminal case calling them to account. And this remains the big problem that we face, that there is a complete absence of law. And my final thing was just to sort of sketch out how that's actually come about. Obviously, when the Coalition Provisional Authority, the CPA, was in charge of Iraq in the first year of the occupation, basically these contractors knew that they were absolutely safe. No one was ever going to be able to touch them. They had Paul Bremer and the CPA defending them. When Bremer left, one of the final acts that the CPA did was to put in place this Order 17. And Order 17 of the CPA, issued in the summer of 2004, conferred complete immunity on all foreign contractors so that they could not be prosecuted under Iraqi law. And this meant that all of these private military and security companies are given carte blanche. Don't worry, it doesn't matter if you engage, if you shoot or if you torture or whatever you do, you cannot be prosecuted under Iraqi law. Now that's one of the things actually, in passing, that in this current negotiations between the Bush administration and the Maliki government on the security arrangements for the future, i.e. trying to get the US to get indefinite leave to remain, so to speak, within Iraq, part of what they're negotiating is precisely the repeal of Order 17, because even the Iraqi government realises this is sapping its legitimacy, the fact that they know that contractors can do what they like without fear of prosecution in the Iraqi courts. It's just too much of a scandal even for Iraq at the moment. But basically in Iraq, you're not going to get any redress. What about the international level? On the international level, there is a UN convention on the use of mercenaries. However, it's one of the least signed up to conventions. It's one which has hardly had any countries, and certainly none from the West, signing it up. It's basically been consigned to a sort of a filing cabinet in a dusty corner of the UN and has absolutely no strength to it at all. There is a UN working group on the mercenaries which is actually trying to get a bit more play on these on these private military companies, but is actually not really being able to make any headway. Instead, the Swiss government has joined with the Red Cross to try to put in place some much more weakened form of international cooperation to try to get better human rights clauses into contracts with these private military companies. But it doesn't begin to solve the problems in terms of their immunity. So no redress in Iraq, no redress at the international level. The only place where you're left trying to actually hold these companies to account is in their home countries. And basically that means, particularly the US, very much the UK. The UK is one of the leading industries in the world at the moment in this respect. To an extent, France and Australia and more countries are now coming forward. But basically for us here in the UK, it's a question of going back to the government and saying, look, 2002, you admitted that we have absolutely no law on this. You admitted that was a big problem. And yet you've done nothing about it. So we at War and Want have been coming back to the government for the last 3 or 4 years saying, Clearly, this is becoming a more and more urgent problem given the human rights violations committed by these private military groups in Iraq. What are you doing about it? 2005, Jack Straw, when he was then Foreign Secretary, started another round of internal Whitehall consultations about it, saying, you know, we have still got the problem hasn't gone away, what are we going to do about it? It just went backwards and forwards in Whitehall. We then tried to up the ante and put more pressure on. We had the public campaign, which we have been running for the last 3 years. And we found that we had actually made some difference. Eventually, the Freedom of Information Challenge, which we put into the Foreign Office, showed that they had, in response to this campaign, drawn up a consultation with the public, which would then be the first steps towards legislation. So it looked as if we'd got what we were hoping for, that move towards legislation which we would want to ban the use of these private military companies in combat situations and regulate very closely what they can do in other situations. However, at the last minute, before this consultation was put out, they pulled it. Literally just in the last couple of months, something has happened within the Foreign Office whereby that whole motion forward has been negated. And we're trying to find out what that is at the moment, and we're going to once again put the pressure back on them. We've got legal challenges provisionally towards judicial review, but obviously we know we haven't really got the money for going down that path too far. But why is it that when they've recognised it's a massive problem, they've recognised they've still got no law to deal with this, they're actually now pulling out of it right at the last moment? And that's why I think for us, just to finish off for this particular presentation, putting the pressure on the British government to bring into our own legal system some form of accountability for these private military companies remains one of the first things, most practical, tangible things we can do. We know that they feel under pressure about this. I've talked with government ministers, Lord Malloch Brown was the number 2 to Miliband within the Foreign Office, and he said, we recognise we've really failed on this, and yet there's some political block which is stopping us going forward. And that's why if people were able to take away these type of materials which we've got, we've been running a campaign trying to put pressure on both through the MPs, but a lot of support in Parliament to try to get this legislation through. And this particular document's got a bit more background plus a letter to send to MPs as well. But also directly to the government. We joined forces with Amnesty International, who hadn't really worked on this before. We went to them saying, we believe that this is a genuine, important human rights case which you should take up. They came in with us on this particular postcard, which goes directly to the Foreign Secretary. So we're going to continue this campaign. We think it is a campaign which we can win. And once you start winning that in one country, that then applies all the way around the world. Because at the moment, it's not just Iraq, they've gone into Afghanistan, they're working more and more in Nigeria. It's beginning to spiral into this new world where war is no longer something which just has to be waged by states in the old style, you know, monopoly over the legitimate use of force. Suddenly, it can be privatised. And the privatisation of war is something we desperately want to stop before it even gets further than it hasn't been happening. Thank you.